Join passionate automotive trainer and coach Andrew Uglow as he delves into the idea of nailing the right problem before you even think about the fix. He talks to why articulating the problem clearly is half the battle and how to avoid solutions that miss the mark. I'm Anthony Pearl, your host of the Frictionless Workshop podcast. Let's get cranking. Andrew, I wanted to ask you, I guess, a leading question in that if you're a workshop owner and you have the first issue of trying to define the problem, but then you have the secondary issue of trying to find the solution. So talk me through as a workshop owner, what is the first steps that they need to go through?
If we're going to do diagnosis effectively, the very, very first question that we always ask when we do diagnosis is, what's actually the problem? So many times customers come in and they complain about a problem on their car. And with respect, I don't generally care so much about what the customer says about their car. You know, it won't start, it won't stop, it won't unlock, it won't this, it won't that. You know, it should be blue, my radio doesn't work. Well, you know, the list of possibilities is endless. I'm really interested in, is the car actually doing that? And is that really a fault? Is that really something wrong? Because sometimes customers, and can I say, given the complexity of technology on cars, it's arguable that you need a training class to be able to work your own car when you get it when it's new. And so sometimes customers complain about things that are perfectly normal, simply because they don't have good information to work with. And I would argue that we see a similar sort of thing with business owners. Business owners are usually very close to the problems in their workshop, and that's a good thing. And at the same time, it can blinker their perspective on what's really going on. And so we go back to the first question. Well, what's actually going on? We see the tip of the iceberg, but what is that really? What is that really? And is that a problem? And so we start to go with the skills shortage. What's the skills shortage? Well, to quote Yoda again, named must your problem be before solve it you can. Or as Charles Kettering, who was the head of GM research for over 30 years, an absolute genius in the industry, he said, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. And so if you can state what your problem is explicitly, you are a long way towards solving the problem. Noise in car is very vague and general. You know, loose suspension bolt at the left-hand rear of the front suspension cradle. Well, that's much more easier to resolve because you actually know what you're dealing with now instead of a noise, whatever that is. And a noise is simply a sound a customer doesn't like, right? So a noise could be something that's perfectly normal. It doesn't mean there's a fault. So going then and diving deeper into the skills shortage, you have to go and ask things like, do you actually have enough qualified people in your workshop? Because if you don't, that is not a skills shortage. That is a labor shortage. Do your technicians have the required skills and ability to consistently perform successfully right now? If the answer to that is no, then yes, you actually have a skills problem, which is underlying that problem is a development problem, not a training problem. And we'll talk about that in later episodes. If your techs, you know, don't take responsibility and don't really give a damn about their work, we call it professional attendance, right? They rock up, get paid, and that's really about as much as they contribute. And maybe you have the odd person like that, or had the odd person like that in your business. If they're consistently doing poor quality work, then you've got an engagement issue. That is very different to a skills issue. I can give you a dozen different examples of people who are truly gifted in their ability and just don't give a damn. And so the issue isn't they don't have the ability. The issue is actually engagement. And fixing that is completely different to training someone technically to give them the skills and knowledge that they need. Digging further, and this is where it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. If you feel that you have to constantly watch your technicians and constantly double check and hover over them and make sure they're doing the right thing and check their diagnosis because you feel they're constantly getting it wrong, or they are actually constantly getting it wrong, you're actually dealing with a management issue there. you're not necessarily dealing with a skills issue. Now, it could also be a skills issue, but the issue underlying this is a management issue. And I often, when we talk to workshop owners and workshop management, and they go, yeah, but my technicians are peanuts. You know, they wouldn't know up if I drew it on their forehead. And you go, well, yeah, that's also a management issue because you haven't managed their development well. And that's back on you. That's not necessarily back on them. Now, sure, they hold a stake to that. You know, you can't make chicken salad from chicken feathers. I get that. But at the same time, your management, like this is your responsibility to solve this. And we can dig deeper. Those people that do the MVP, minimum viable product, and they have an attitude of, can I do this much work and still stay employed? You know, or what about if I did this much less work? Can I still stay employed? Maybe you've come across those sorts of people. That's an attitude issue. We know this, but that attitude issue is actually driven by a mindset, and it's problematic because the correct development hasn't been done, not necessarily a training issue. If you're having problems because you've got a whole bunch of young people and they don't have quote unquote enough experience, which is another complaint that we hear. Well, experience, yeah, absolutely, that's an issue. But again, I go back to behind that lack of experience is an issue with development. That's the underlying cause. And we'll explain development perhaps a little bit later. If you're constantly training technicians and after a period of time they leave, well, that's a retention issue. You really want to be looking at why are they leaving? And it's very easy to blame the technician, but let me give you an uncomfortable truth. People leave managers more than they leave jobs. And we've got all the narrative, and we'll talk about this in future episodes. You know, oh, it's all they want is money. Well, maybe. How would you know? How would you test for that? And so this is why we're saying that until you can explicitly describe what's happening instead of just labeling it as a generic skills shortage, you're going to keep coming across the same problems and the same issues and the same headaches and the same grief and the same stress. Rinse and repeat.
Yeah, I think it's that first step really is getting clear on what the actual problem is, isn't it? Because as you say, it's easy to summarize things in a particular way or brush off a individual leaving and not address it as potentially being a problem. But more often than not, the reason people leave a particular workplace or bring a problem to your attention is not because they've got something that's completely isolated and personal to them that has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. And also too, there's patterns. And if you didn't know that you were supposed to be looking for patterns, you never go looking for patterns. And sometimes those patterns require you to look back years. And if you don't have that data available to you, maybe you're new in the role, new in the business, well, you're at a bit of a disadvantage. You can certainly do some research, but often, certainly with the sort of diagnosis that I'm involved in and involved in teaching technicians, we often talk about the service history of the car, you know, and it's a really key piece of information. If the car was in for service 6 months ago for exactly the same problem, that's a red flag. Like, what's really going on? If you've lost, for example, 4 technicians in the last 2 years, yeah, that's a red flag. Now, there might be perfectly rational, reasonable explanations for those. You know, their partner might have got a promotion and they had to move interstate, or, you know, they had a kid or something like that and decided to become a carer for the child while their partner does the financial generation function in the home. Perfectly understandable. But is every one of them those? Could be, or not. How would you know until you test?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, isn't it? That's the first part of trying to and asking the right questions. It's firstly, you've got to do some testing on the situation itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is and we'll talk perhaps about this in a bit more detail in some later episodes, but we did some research into some fairly deep research into what the automotive technical gurus in the industry do. How do they work? And one of their key skills was the ability to conceive or create tests to identify what was really going on. And a test starts with a question. It always starts with a question. But if you aren't curious, if you've already got it, or if you believe you've already got an answer, you're not going to go and ask a question, right? And I think this perhaps also is some of the issues around why this skills shortage is still here after 35 years. People believe they have an answer, and I go, well, yeah, maybe, yes, that's possible, but if the issue isn't solved, then do we really have an answer?
The Frictionless Workshop podcast is brought to you by Solutions Culture. For details on how to get in touch with Andrew, consult the show notes below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the podcast. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's the asking the right question and there's being prepared to listen and to deal with, I guess, what can be an uncomfortable truth as well, isn't there? Because that's a difficult thing for any boss to confront themselves with the fact that there may be some level of discomfort once you start asking the right questions.
Yeah, and this is the second step really in working through what specifically the skills shortage is in your individual workshop, right? If you're a workshop owner or in workshop management, whether that's dealer, franchise, independent business, whichever level that is that you're operating at, step one is actually getting really clear on what exactly are the problems, and like specifically clear. Now, you might just have an issue where people just don't know enough. They're struggling with technology, and it is in fact actually a lack of skills that is contributing to the difficulties or the friction in my workshop. But most workshops, I think you'll find that it's a compound issue. We have a lack of people, we have a labor shortage, and the people that we have don't yet have enough skill, and that's a problem. Or you've got some people that lack the skill, and you've got some others whose attitude is just toxic. And it's creating friction. It's dragging things down. It's costing you money. It's costing you stress and grief. Never mind the impact on them and the environment that your other people are working in. And so, with a compound or with any problem, I guess the first step in is identifying it. The second step then is, well, how do we go about, now that we know what the problem is, what needs to be in place before we can solve it? And there's essentially three things, I think, that you need to prepare yourself for to start solving the problem. So this necessarily won't solve the problem, but if you don't have these pieces, you're nowhere. You're kind of going to keep cutting laps. And the first one of these things that you need to have, that need to be settled for you personally, is that you need to be open to testing the situation. Very often we get a response that says, oh, well, it's this. Oh, it's a lack of skill. Okay, well, how would you know that? What is the test? Just like these technical gurus were able to test things that weren't normally or readily available to be tested. They actually created their own tests. Well, are you open to creating a test to check for that? To see if it is in fact true? Like, it can look true on the surface, but that doesn't make it so. And so being open to testing your situation is the first one, because some people just aren't. That requires effort. That requires work. It also puts up the risk that you might find something you don't like, that the issue might be a lot closer to home than you thought it was, which leads to the second thing that we need to be prepared for, and that's being prepared for discomfort. The irony is that with a skill shortage in the workshop, that is hard. You know, everyone's got to work harder. Everyone's got to do more. There's more stress. Customers are customers, and some of them are awesome, and some of them, or a few of them, are less awesome, and that creates problems and stress. And so everyone's working at a higher rate to try and make up for the people that aren't there, or make up for the skills that aren't there, or make up for the attitudes that are dragging things down. And that's uncomfortable, but so too is the result of your test sometimes. And if you're not prepared to be open to the fact that actually this problem isn't necessarily your people, this problem is you in some cases, well, don't be open to it, but experience the discomfort of having all the friction. It's kind of one or the other, isn't it? And the last thing that you need to be open to do, at least be open towards, is attempting something new. And humans are all of us are like the rest of us, right? We love comfort. We love the old things, the familiar things, the stuff that we know that is tried and true. And sometimes new things are threatening. Sometimes new things are scary. But if you're not at least open to the idea of trying something new, you never will. And so those three things, being open to testing, being open to some probably uncomfortable results of your testing, and then being open to try something new.
So, Andrew, if workshop owners aren't ready for all of these things, are they going to be in a position to apply a solution, or is that really the problem?
It's a bit of a challenge, hey, because it's actually a really big ask to expect people to change, and rather than just diving into change, which can be scary, threatening, costly, potentially damaging if it's not done right, simply moving to the point of just being open to the idea. Are you open to the idea of testing? Are you open to the idea that the results might be uncomfortable? Are you open to that? Are you open to the idea that if you had to try something new, it might be something you'd be open to do? And a lot of business owners are okay with being open. And if you're open, you're now in a far better position to being closed. If you're closed, well, there's limits to what you can achieve, if any. And I just with that idea, with the concept of being closed, Albert Einstein made a statement where he said, you can't solve problems with the same thinking that you used when you caused the problem. And this is true, I think, of our skills shortage, to use the generic term. We are still using the same thinking that we used when the problem was created. And so if the problem is a conventional problem, and it certainly seems to be, using conventional thinking isn't going to solve it. You need to use, assuming that Einstein is in fact correct, you need to use unconventional thinking here. And that requires that you're open to testing things that you thought were true that maybe aren't. It means that you need to be open to the discomfort of finding some answers that really aren't so pleasant to find out. And it means that you need to be open to trying new things that are potentially scary or potentially risky, whether that's financially or all the other ways that it could be risky. But until you start trying effectively unconventional things, you're never going to solve your conventional problem.
Thank you for listening to the Frictionless Workshop podcast. For details on how to get Andrew working with you and your technicians, take a look at the show notes. There's also a link to some special content you can access. I'm Anthony Pearl, reminding you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.